Right, good evening, everybody. Good evening, Clive, Andrew, Christine, and the members of the Personnel Board who are here. My name is John Halsall. I'm the Chairman of the Personnel Board and the Leader of the Council. John Kaiser, who's the Deputy Chairman. Actually, it says Vice Chairman here. I've never known the difference of the Council and the Personnel Board. Pauline Hellier-Simons, Stephen Conway, Clive Jones is attending the meeting virtually, and Simon Weeks. And in attendance is Anne Hunter and Madeline. Oh, I'm sorry, Rachel. And I should have said Rachel Bishop Firth. I do apologise. And Madeline and Anne, who are from Democratic Services. There's no apologies for absence, so getting on to the minutes of the previous meeting, anybody got any concerns? If not, then can I have a proposer and a seconder? Simon and Stephen, thank you very much. And then moving on, public questions. Are there any public questions? Any members' questions? And no members' questions either. So page 7, the recruitment and appointment of directors. Declarations of interest. You're right. I always forget that. Any declarations of interest? No. Okay. Recruitment and appointment of directors and assistant directors, permanent interim. Just to talk around what we're trying to do, we're in a different world, and where historically we would have favoured entirely permanent staff, and being the age that I am, I probably still do. We are faced with a situation of changing technology and changing jobs, of the need to recognise that we're going to have interims. So this paper is a proposal for a process to recruit both permanent and interim directors and bring the assistant directors also under the ambit of the personnel board. I think that's important because, as I said, it reflects the changing market, the changing employment market. It also reflects the need from time to time of change managers and people doing a specific task, which then goes, and as such the role goes as well. So that's the background. There are changes of the Constitution which have been through the CRWG, subject to the agreement of this board, and the changes require that the director or the head of the paid service with the executive member and the chairman of the personnel board will fill vacancies, and those vacancies should go through as vacancies declared on structures through the personnel board. And that's really it. Any questions?
That's on as well. I mean, I've been at a double disadvantage. Thank you. One thing that struck me as slightly odd about background information was this reference to the gig economy. which I could see that as relevant for some kinds of employment, but is it really likely to have an effect on directors and deputy directors, interim directors and deputy directors? That seemed slightly odd to me. I also notice.
Sorry, the question was, is it related to the state of the economy?
Well, no, it's more that I was wondering why there was a reference to the gig economy when that doesn't seem to be very relevant to appointments at director and assistant director at interim level.
We have maybe not the gig economy, but maybe so. There is a changing requirement of the. Maybe not as far as the gig economy is concerned, but maybe so. I'll get you to. But the reality is that we are a local authority who is undergoing a lot of change all the time. The change is almost permanent change now, and in order to execute that change, we are employing a huge amount of interims, which we were not in more stable times. Now, it is your view or anybody else's whether that rate of change is going to continue and accelerate. I suspect it probably will. Certainly with technology-based jobs, we will be requiring people to do a specific job and then move out. An example is Stephen Brown, who's doing a job as an assistant director. He was brought in specifically to bring the PPP back in-house, or the elements of the PPP that we brought back in-house. And that requires, in change management terms, specific skills, which are different from the skills which would be to run it in normal affairs. So we recognised that we had a big hole in our constitution for recruitment of interims, because the interim recruitment has been at the gift, if that's the right word, of the chief executive and directors. And I think given that the volume of assistant directors and directors, which are interim appointments, it should come under the ambit of the personnel board and members.
My other observation really related to the changes to the Constitution, where obviously in bold we're seeing some member involvement, but there is a fairly narrow member involvement. The leader of the council and the chairman of the personnel board are one and the same person, which seems to me to be narrowing this down very much. A relevant executive member might be involved, but essentially this seems to be concentrating, dare I say, a lot of the member influence in the hands of yourself. Now, I think you're a very fine chap, but I just think in constitutional terms, I'm not sure this is such a great idea.
Actually not. It's only directors, and it's no there's no guarantee that I should be the chairman of the personnel board. They could be two people, and normally are.
People could be, but they can also be the same person, and they are at present.
They are at the moment, but I'm involved only in so far as directors are concerned, not the assistant directors, and the main volume of appointments is in assistant directors.
John, my concern is we have a situation where the head of paid service is doing this at present, and now we're moving to a situation where there's member involvement, which is fine, but the range of members being involved seems to be very narrow, and that is my concern.
The words are very clear. It's in consultation with the head of the paid service, and the paid staff have a hierarchy which we are not involved in as members. It's in consultation with.
the range of people consulted on the member side is narrow, and I think too narrow.
Fair enough.
Actually, Stephen's second point is actually a point I was going to make as well. And I just wonder whether, because obviously one of the reasons we're doing this is to improve the level of oversight and scrutiny of the appointment of this level of people. And under the constitution proposal, the member involvement would normally, in normal circumstances, would be the leader, the chairman of the personnel board and the relevant executive member. And as Stephen says, that isn't at the moment 3 people, it's 2 people, because in essence you're dual-hatted. And I was just wondering, without being unduly pedantic, whether it was appropriate that there should be a reference put in there that the chairman of personnel board, or if that happens to be the leader, the vice chairman of the personnel board, so that you'd still maintain scrutiny of 3 members rather than 2. Just as a suggestion. I appreciate, previously the chairman of the personnel board hasn't coincided with the role of leader, but currently it is. And I just thought that would cover all options if you made that minor change.
Super, thank you very much. I was going to make the same points actually that Stephen did. This is almost housekeeping, but on page 8, I think we just ought to revisit this if this is going to be a report which is kind of published on our website. So when we're talking about the types of workers, I think this may be just a typo, but it's gotten scrambled. So under permanent workers, for example, you have fixed term contractors. So I think that should be just revisited. I would suggest, really following on from what Stephen said, that the section underneath it is reduced right down. I think he's right that the statement, for example, about gig economy, workers in the gig economy isn't particularly relevant here. And I think that our statement that workers are preferring not to be part of a permanent workforce in the gig economy, I think is also a pretty controversial statement. I think there's quite a good summary right at the bottom of page 42 about the specific instances where we might rely on an agency worker. And I would be tempted to borrow.
We're not on part 2 yet.
We're not, but I'm giving you this as an example of wording, which I think is a very good short summary of the reasons why you might want to have an agency worker. And I think it would be better to take wording something like that and add it to page 8 instead of the long paragraph. I mean, the reasons why you're going to want to have somebody come in as an interim director is because you need somebody's skills for a limited period, you need to fill a gap for a temporary period, or there are specialist skills that you can only bring in really realistically on a temporary basis. So that was the first suggestion that I was going to make. And then on going to page 9, we're talking about looking at bringing people in for a period not exceeding 12 months. I'm just wondering if actually we wanted to make that a longer period. So if you take, for example, a maternity leave period, by the time you've taken into account somebody who wants to take a full period of maternity leave, plus the handover at the beginning of the maternity leave and the handover at the end of the maternity leave, that can easily exceed 12 months. So you might want to, for example, make that 18 months, but in line with both what Stephen and Simon were saying, maybe look at having a slightly wider group of people look at this and approve that kind of appointment.
Thank you. I think we do have to recognise that working practices are changing, and that's what this does. And we'll probably have to get used to even more interim staff than we've had in the past, unfortunately. I agree with the sentiment behind this. I think it's a good idea, but I've got a sympathy with what Stephen said, that in narrowing it down, it's been narrowed too much. I don't think the whole of the personnel board should be involved. That's overkill, but maybe the leader plus 2 or 3 other members of personnel board, just to widen it out a little bit. And one question relating to pages 9 and 11, why is the monitoring officer left off?
Let me cover the first point. I think that it can't be too onerous on the appointment of interim directors, and it's otherwise it becomes very difficult for the operational people to operate. It has to be a decision taken by the operational staff or head of paid service and staff in conjunction with the people the person has to work with, and an oversight of the chairman of the personnel board. So I would hesitate to make that a mob of people, because it would be very difficult to operate. But I will ask Andrew, who's on the line, to explain. Oh, sorry, you want to speak anyway. To explain why the monitoring officer, indeed, you're the monitoring officer, is excluded from this.
I am. Thank you, Chair. And yeah, just to respond to that, and if I could just respond to one or two other comments just while I'm on the call at the moment. So firstly, the monitoring officer, there are separate arrangements for the appointment of the head of paid service, section 151 officer and monitoring officer. They're effectively council appointments. So the monitoring officer post is an assistant director post, but that I think is answering Pauline's specific question in terms of the way the constitution is written and the extracts that you've got in front of you this evening. If I could just say from an officer perspective around the question about the involvement of members or more than one member of the personnel board or others, when this was considered by the corporate leadership team, it was felt to strike an appropriate balance between getting the appropriate oversight and authority to proceed with not unduly delaying processes. You'll see from the report that in terms of the interim appointment of assistant directors at the moment, there's no member involvement at all, and I think what's proposed will certainly strengthen that process. And equally with the interim director appointments, it's introducing that new duty to consult, which again I think strengthens it. But it is a balance, as members will be aware. What we don't want to do is lose the opportunity of recruiting the right interim director, and often these really good people are in very high demand across local government at the moment. So it's trying to strike that balance is what I'd say from my perspective. Thank you, Chair.
Stephen.
Thank you, John. I wonder, really, just to pick up on the points that Pauline made, and also just the collective unease about whether we've got quite right the level of member oversight and the nature of member oversight, or rather the content of member oversight. I wonder whether there's any support amongst colleagues for the idea of oversight by the chairman of the personnel board, the deputy chairman of the personnel board, and in the interests of political balance, as he's a member of the personnel board, the leader of the opposition. That would give me a sense that we were involving members from more than one party in this process. So there would be no accusation that it was party political. And I think that would keep us with 3 members. It should be simple and straightforward to be able to deal with.
I would have no with that for permanent directors. We have a process for permanent directors, but an interim is almost by definition an instantaneous decision. We are not buying a long-term appointment. It's a short-term appointment, and therefore a very simple process is necessary. And
currently, there are 3 people, or in practice 2, involved in that process. Everyone who's spoken said they would prefer there to be 3 to 2. I don't see that the process would be any slower by having the leader of the opposition as one of those people involved in the process. As the leader of the opposition is a member of the personnel board already, I don't see what possible problem that there can be with that. So I would like to propose that.
Hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
I've had my hand up for some time, Joe.
Sorry, I can't see your hand being up.
Yeah, it has been up for
I do apologise.
quite some time. No problem. I think the suggestion that Stephen has come up with is a very good idea, and certainly I would support it. The other question that I wanted to ask is, what is the view of the head of paid service about changing these arrangements for the appointment of interim directors? Because previously, head of paid service has been able to appoint interim directors by themselves, and I guess this has been the practice for a number of years. There's quite a big change now in that it could be 2 or 3 other people being involved, and I understand the reasons why you want to do that, but I would like to know that the head of paid service is actually comfortable with these changes.
Okay, well, the head of the paid service is not on the call tonight, so I can only speak for her.
Well, Andrew's got his hand up. Maybe he.
No, I'm going to defer to Andrew, but these arrangements have been through CLT, and therefore it is a reflection of the change in our business. At the moment, we have had a mindset which has been to have a minimum number of interims and working towards eliminating the interims. This is a recognition that has changed as and therefore there needs to be some member involvement, which indeed in terms of current practice, you will find that every appointment is made in conjunction with and in consultation with the relevant executive member anyway. Andrew.
Little to add to that, Clive, from what the chair has just said, but yeah, just to reassure you that this has been through the corporate leadership team at length, and as I said in my previous comment, from an office perspective, it's about getting the right balance right, having good governance at the same time as not unduly delaying the process, making the process overly bureaucratic. But obviously that's a decision for the personnel board in terms of what you'd like to see and the member scrutiny of appointments.
Okay, so you're saying again, Andrew, that the senior leadership team are comfortable with these changes, if not happy with the changes?
That's correct.
Okay, so we will see that in the minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. I like Stephen's suggestion, and if he wants to make that as a formal proposal, I'd be happy to second it. But before I do, can I ask, what involvement does the executive member have, the relevant executive member for that department?
Well, currently, pretty much all the appointments, well, I think all the appointments in the last 3 years have been done with the involvement of the relevant executive member.
That's what I thought.
And all the director appointments have been done through the personnel board.
That's fine. That's what I thought. It's just nice to be reassured.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I suppose it all depends on which way you look at it. I mean, I look at it slightly different to Clive, because I see it as a way of supporting the chief executive. I see that the chief executive's a bit out on the limb at the moment, making these decisions. And as we have more and more of these interims at this very high level, which is, as you just said, very unusual, I think if I was in her position, I'd jump at somebody saying, I will support you doing that, which the consultation is. Whether you go, I'm a bit perplexed. I can understand what you're saying, but we're moving from at the moment she doesn't have to consult with anybody, and you're saying we need to consult with the leader, well, or the chairman of the personnel board. It's fortunate or unfortunate that you're the same person. It depends on the way you look at it. But you would also have to consult with the executive member. Now, we've gone from saying, well, if she's not very happy with that, I'm not quite sure how the chief executive would react if we went to, well, actually, we've sat down a personnel board, we think it's a great idea, but we want to chuck a load more people at it. If I was her, I'd be a little bit reluctant to accept that, to be honest with you, because what happens is you take away all of her choice and inevitably end up with the whole of the personnel board making these decisions. And as you say, they tend to be made fairly briefly or very quickly, because if we lose somebody, it's not always easy to find the right person. I think one other thing that we need to recognise, which I think is really important, we have a level of salaries within this council, which is pegged with other councils. I see an awful lot of those other councils ignoring those salaries because they can't find the right calibre of person. And I think sometimes the only way you get the right calibre of person is you do go for somebody who is working as an interim and is flexible. It's changing times. There's no question about that. I mean, when you look at the fact that, and I hate to pick a Slough as an example, but they had a chief executive on at nearly £450,000. Well, you'd never dream of paying that for a full-time. So the argument may be, well, for that sort of money, you should really get something a bit better. I'm just confused by it to a certain degree, to be honest with you.
In the hope of clarifying things, may I say, first of all, actually there's a very significant area of agreement on this. I certainly accept, and I think everyone who's spoken accepts, that we need to do this. I don't think you need to worry about, from my point of view, certainly justifying doing something like this. We have reservations which Rachel has expressed very clearly about the background, whether it's really relevant and helpful putting all this background information in. I think that actually creates a quite false impression of why we're doing this. And I would much prefer something very simple along the lines that Rachel has suggested. I think that would be much more appropriate. There's clearly agreement in the CLT, so amongst paid staff, that member oversight is okay. That's something they're comfortable with and happy with. So we're all, in general terms, singing from the same song sheet. The detail really is the background, which we think should be changed, the possibility of extending this 12-month period to 18 months for the reasons Rachel said, and simply just shifting the composition of the member oversight. And I would suggest that so long as the member oversight is not simply by one political group, there's involvement of the leader of the opposition, I think we're done, we're happy. So I think we can try and make business on this by just seeing whether it's possible to tweak those areas. And then I think we have agreement.
I would be, we're talking about paying people, some of these people will be earning in excess of £250,000. I think reviewing it after 12 months is the right thing to do. I wouldn't want to extend it in my role as financial, responsible for the financial aspects of the council. I wouldn't extend it any more than 12 months. I do want people to sit down and start reviewing it at that point.
Let's look at the 3 points which Stephen's raised. One is the changing in the preamble. Are you able to do that quickly, Andrew, so that it can be published?
Yeah, yes, we could. We haven't got very much time before publication of the council agenda, but I'm sure we could get on that and put something much simpler that conveys the reason for doing this.
In terms of the 12 months, I tend to agree with John that we are unlikely to take some. Rachel.
Sorry, just on that very point, I absolutely understand what John is saying about you might very well want to review after the 12 months. do you want to leave yourself the flexibility to be able to offer an interim for up to, say, 18 months with a review point after 12 months, so that you can plan in advance and get the right person who's going to be available for the right time to cover, for example, a maternity leave? And that way you could have the best of both worlds.
If I might just add, that does say, subject to the agreement of the chairman and personnel board and the leader, this period can be further extended. Sorry, it says very clearly here that that 12-month period can be extended. So I think I'm content with it remaining at 12 months because there's an opportunity there to extend it if necessary. It's quite clearly set out. I think that's fine, personally.
I think what I'm thinking about there is where you want to ensure that you can attract somebody for the whole period of time for which you need them, as opposed to taking somebody on for 12 months and then saying we are going to need to extend you. It can be better planning if you say up front, we know that we're going to need you for 14 months. That decision is made, but then you have a review point at the 12 months.
I take your point, but it does say it can be further extended as required. And if at the point of appointment, you know that you're going to need somebody for 15 months, there's nothing that stops it being a 15-month appointment. It actually says that it can be extended as required. It doesn't say at the end of the 12-month period. So it could be at the commencement of the 12 months.
I'd be happy with that if the meaning is clear. I must admit I read that as you would have to have the person serving for 12 months and then you would review whether you could extend them.
Andrew, please.
Yeah, just a related but slightly different point about the extension. So at the moment, the way that the changes are drafted allows for an extension beyond 12 months with the appropriate consultation. The question that I've got to put to the committee, which I understood was discussed at the Constitution Review Working Group, is beyond 12 months, do you want to put an additional proviso in that there's a check 6 months later, for example, or every 6 months beyond the initial 12-month period? I think, Chair, that was something you discussed recently.
I would support, and the other thing I would come back to with, if you give more than 12 months, we live in changing times. And if we contract somebody for 14 months or 20 months and we find out we don't no longer need them, it makes it very difficult for us to come out of that contract without paying that contract in full. We have had experience of that in this council already.
So I was just going to add the point, if that's been a difficulty, that's something which you should be able to deal with in the writing of that contract, so that it's clear that if you need to end the contract at any time, you can do so by giving notice following the appropriate procedure.
So do we think that that's included in what we've got? And do we agree that it should be reviewed every 6 months, as Andrew's suggesting? Okay. In terms of the interim appointments, I do not want to fetter the chief executive and the chairman and the head of the paid service, because I do know that the interims are a market which is fairly instantaneous. So I would be inclined to actually simplify it and take the chairman of the personnel board or the leader out of this, rather than go the other way around and have more people involved my point is that it has to be a quick process.
I accept entirely that it needs to be quick. Currently, we have 3 in principle, 2 in practice. As we have provision for 3, I think all I'm suggesting is we change the composition of that 3.
Where's the provision for 3?
The leader of the council, relevant executive member, and the chairman of the personnel board. At the moment, 2 of those roles are filled by you, but it's not necessarily, as you said yourself, going to be the case in the future. So if we do need to involve the executive member, may I suggest that we have the executive member, the chairman of the personnel board, and the leader of the opposition. It gives the ruling group 2 members, the opposition only 1, but it at least gives some degree of political balance in the way this operates. If we're going to have member involvement, I'd rather it was member involvement that was balanced.
Certainly, in the terms of the assistant directors, the relevant executive member is key because that's who they're working for. I'll just put it out.
Go back to the point which Clive made, which was the chief executive is quite comfortable with this, but looking at it takes away a power that she currently has, or the person would have. And I'm just a bit nervous that we don't continue moving forward with this, because the next step is for them to be discussed at the whole of the personnel board, and that doesn't make for fleet of foot, does it really? Your suggestion that maybe just have the executive member involved, maybe that's the way forward. I'm just nervous that the more people you get involved, the more discussions you have around it, and as I said, I wouldn't want to make that decision without speaking to the chief executive first.
John, in response to the other John's comment, nobody is suggesting, I haven't heard anybody suggest this evening that the whole of the personnel board should be involved. I think we all accept it's a process that needs a relatively light touch from members, and it needs to be swiftly dealt with. What has been through CLT potentially allows for 3 members to be involved. All I'm suggesting is we have a different composition of what the 3 members are. It's nothing really radical. It's just making sure that, looked at from the outside, this is a process that has some political balance in it. And I see no problem with that. I can't imagine it's ever going to become a party political thing. But if it did, there's no risk of the ruling group not getting what it prefers. So if it were the relevant executive member, the chairman of the personnel board,
I think it's a
opposition, that would be
the misunderstanding of the process. The process is a consultative process. It's not a decisive process. That is the head of the paid service and the director have the ultimate authority.
We did have something approaching agreement on that, and it seems a shame if that's now going to unravel.
I would just say, I mean, this isn't the paper that went to CLT. I mean, what we're doing is fundamentally changing the paper now. And if we change that paper, I don't think we can agree it here tonight, because
all we're changing is the composition of the member oversight. I don't think CLT will be particularly worried about who the members are. They have accepted the principle of member oversight. They won't want lots more members involved, I'm quite sure. You're right. We're not proposing that. We're just proposing an alteration of the composition of the 3 members involved.
That's right. If we're going to change this, we need to pull the paper or approve it as it is. Clive?
Yes, thank you, John. I don't see that it involving the leader of the opposition is a fundamental change, really. We have still got 3 people. You're just changing one of those for leader of the opposition. And I would have thought that the CLT would be quite happy with some sort of political balance. But then it's not for me to put words into their mouths, especially as they're not here.
I think the last bit what Clive said's true. I mean, we can't put words in their mouth, and we've agreed one paper. We now wish to modify it. We may consider it a minor change. They may not consider it a minor change. And I think they need to be given opportunities to look at it again. If we agree that's the way we go.
Yeah, we don't have to decide this tonight.
Any suggestion, Chairman, is that since we've got Andrew Moulton here, we could ask him that question. It's not a political question. It's about the makeup of the oversight.
Andrew?
Well, all I'd say, I think John Kaiser's already said it, but yeah, that's not the paper that CLT have considered. So I can't speak for CLT in terms of their view on that particular proposal.
So we've got a choice to either vote it through or pull it. What would you like to do?
You've actually got a proposal by Stephen, seconded by Pauline, that you haven't taken yet.
What are you proposing, Pauline?
It was Stephen proposing.
Yeah, I think it was me that was proposing, and Pauline offered, obviously subject to knowing precisely what it was I was proposing, to second it. I was proposing merely that we changed the member involvement in this process to read relevant executive member, chairman of the personnel board, and leader of the opposition.
John?
We just heard Andrew has said. So proposing another paper, seconding it, and voting it through, knowing the paper we've got in front of us, CLT, sets a dangerous precedent.
Well, I'm happy, Chairman, to second that so that at least we can move to a vote on it and then see what the majority of the committee thinks.
So the proposal, Stephen's proposal, are you seconding that? Yeah. So those in favour? And I'm against. So
you have the casting vote.
Yeah, so well, it's against. So the next vote is, shall we accept the paper subject to the agreed amendments to the background as it is?
We could have another vote, John, on taking it back to CLT with the changes.
Well, I was going to say, or take it back to CLT. So let's take it. So we'll refer it, we'll pull the paper. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So that needs to be pulled from both bits of the agenda. Right.
We just for clarity's sake, John, we're pulling the paper this evening, but we're going to consult CNLT on whether this new composition is, from their point of view, satisfactory.
So with
could I just ask, though, that the whole purpose of this was because of the number of interims we're appointing and to have oversight. The number of it was to address the issue of oversight, the appointment of particularly of interims. If it's going to go back to CLT, that's fine, but is it possible that we could put some kind of deadline and we could try and bring this back and have this formalised as part of our personnel policy?
we do need to
Otherwise, it's just kicked down the road for another
we do need to formalise it because we have an existing large number of interims. So one way of formalising it would be to agree the paper in front of us and then amend it as in subsequent personnel boards, which I think I'd probably favour. And the other one is to pull the paper. So which would you prefer?
I'd prefer to have something in place as soon as possible. If it's not
So
perfect, that can be changed in a couple of months' time.
Can I take a vote on then approving the paper as it stands, subject to the changes of preamble, and then amending it subsequently if appropriate?
Just to ask for a bit of clarity on that, can we be given some more certainty that it will actually come back to the next personnel board with the opportunity to amend this composition of member oversight? I'm willing to accept, in the interest of making sure we were able to move forward. We're all agreeing on the principles behind this. We're all only having a difference of opinion about composition, and I think we can resolve that. I'm happy, for pragmatic reasons, to accept what Simon's suggesting, but with a reassurance, this will actually come back to the next personnel board with the opportunity for us, having consulted CLT, to make this change if that is something CLT find acceptable.
Happy with that, so we can move forward. Thank you. Is everybody in favour with that? Yeah, okay, thank you. Christine, the HR update report, the publication of HR activity on the council's website.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. There are a number of reports or publications that we are required to, excuse me, make. One is around the gender pay, which is a government initiative, and the other one is around what we're doing in terms of the apprenticeship scheme, which is another government department scheme. The gender pay report, we've actually calculated the figures and the numbers in accordance with government guidance. So the report that is attached as an annex, an appendix, sets out how we are required by law to publish our gender pay information. And the details in the apprenticeship report, again, that sets out the requirements by the government. So these are sort of reports that set out information that we are required to publish on our website in relation to gender pay and our participation in the apprenticeship scheme.
Rachel?
Yes, I was just going to ask one question about page 29, which is 5-6 about the apprentices, where we're talking about we've been unable to maximise the benefits of the entire levy. I was just wondering if you could just give us a bit more information, Christine, about the size of the gap, how much of the levy we haven't been able to utilise, very roughly how many apprenticeship places that might represent, and what alternatives have been considered, because we talked, for example, about schools, and it's not ideally set up, but could we, for example, take on some more IT apprenticeships? I'd just be really interested in your thoughts about that.
Yeah, the amount that's in the levy, because it's a pot that accumulates over time, and then after a number of years, and I don't have the detail about the number of years, you lose the money. So at the moment, I know that we've got like a 6-figure sum that's sitting in our pot that we are trying to use. The scheme has been modified a number of times by the government. So in years gone by, it was really for younger people, but now it's sort of broadening. So other roles for people over 16, you know, it's not sort of age limited, can be apprentices, but you have to have a development portion of the role. There's quite a sort of detailed requirement for support. So sometimes, particularly in schools, we find that there isn't enough time to support individuals going through the scheme. So that's particularly around schools, but we do have challenges or face challenges within the council. So what we're going to do this year, it's Apprenticeship Week next week, and we're going to do a bit of a push and promotion to people across the council so that people start to consider any vacancies that they have and whether or not they can convert those vacancies into apprenticeship posts so that we can take advantage and claw back some of our money which has gone into the apprenticeship levy pool. It's quite a slow process and a lot of work talking to managers and persuading people to come on board and convert posts, but we have got a dedicated resource in HR 3-day a week that is working on the whole apprenticeship scheme and getting more people on board. We are working to make sure that places like IT have an apprenticeship. I'm looking at whether or not we can have someone in HR, and you know, we're looking across the council where we can actually employ apprentices. So there's going to be quite a lot that's done this year to try and promote the scheme and to try and convert some of our existing posts into apprenticeship posts.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. And I have worked for more than one organisation which has made that strategic decision, actually, that they're not going to use the whole of their apprenticeship levy pot and they will let it lapse. And I think it's very good with everything that the council is doing to try and maximise the number of apprenticeships and to maximise our use of the levy. I think it's something that probably we as a group on a regular basis will be quite interested in understanding the gap and the successes that you have had in trying to make the maximum use of the money that we have in that pot. So thank you very much, Christine.
Thank you.
Thank you. Christine, this is the best and clearest report I've ever seen on this topic, so thank you for that. I'd like to focus on the apprenticeship scheme, which is indeed a great scheme, and it's grown a lot over the last few years. It wasn't so long ago we had no apprentices at all. Now we've got quite a good number. Only last week I was helped by an IT apprentice who sorted my Teams out that wasn't working properly very, very efficiently and spent a good 2 hours teaching me about other things as well, which have been very, very valuable. So it's working and it's good. My only concern, not that's too strong a word really, but a question really, at the bottom of page 29, there are some challenges with the existing pathways that are acting as a deterrent for new applicants. For example, there's a level 3 teaching assistant and a level 6 teacher apprenticeship, but nothing in between to bridge the gap, which seems a wasted opportunity, actually. Is this down to legislation, or is it down to the way that we work things here? And if it's the latter, can we do something to change that and do something to bridge that gap?
Unfortunately, it's not down to us. It's down to the way the scheme has been set up by the government. It's one of the things that we're feeding back, what we see as some of the failings of the scheme, not just this council. There are a sort of group of councils that are feeding back to the government some of the challenges on in the scheme, particularly around sort of teaching assistants. So it's not us, it's the way the scheme has been set up. I think the government haven't thought things through properly all the way along.
Just a quick question, Christine, regarding the fact that generally speaking as a council, we tend to, in anything to do with personnel, we look at just those people who work directly with the council. In this report, we're obviously including all the maintained schools as well, which hence why some of the numbers are quite large. But the most recent year we've got numbers for, there's a total of 73 apprentices. Do you have I'm not asking for precise numbers, but an idea of what proportion of those 73 are in WBC staff as opposed to at schools? Just approximately, if you happen to know that.
Yeah, I don't have the figures, but I can certainly email you and email the committee and let you know exactly how many this year are staff, because the report is sort of historic.
Yes, I understand. It's just that I have no idea whether of the 73, 72 are working at the schools, in which case it's not something we're directly influencing.
Yeah, the majority will be working for us because not many schools are taking up apprenticeship, and because of COVID as well, it's been a bit tricky for them as well to take on additional people and give them the right sort of support. But I'll let you know. I'll find out the numbers.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you, Christine. Just one question. It doesn't seem to be clear. In the event that we take on a major contract, and now we are seeing a lot of pressure put on pension funds with regards to fossil fuel and whether they're investing in those types of companies. Is there any benefit for us as well as the apprentice when we let major contracts? As part of that major contract let, we also include the fact we'd like them to take on some apprentices?
I don't think you can legally insist. I think you can maybe suggest that it might be a good thing for them to do, but I don't think you can legally insist that they take on apprentices as part of a contract. I will check, but I'm pretty sure with our procurement team, but I'm pretty sure you couldn't insist. You could only suggest or that it might be a good idea.
Chairman, I would just add, whilst it's not contracts, it's something, as Stephen will recall, we've done for quite a while on planning, where planning permission, particularly for larger projects, does require, it's actually a planning condition that they're a part of an apprenticeship scheme and try and recruit local people into those apprenticeship schemes. So whilst it may not be contracts, we're actually already doing it in association with the award of planning permission for appropriate sized projects.
You're muted, Christine.
Oh, sorry. I said I'll look into that to see what we can do. But I think that we can't insist, but I will check.
So any comments on the gender pay gap? No. Okay. And where did you get on the COVID-19 vaccination policy?
Right. The last year, the government passed legislation that anyone working in a care setting, in a registered CQC registered care site, had to be vaccinated and had to have be fully vaccinated. Because of the challenges this is having in some care homes, and also it was going to be extended to NHS staff, the government seemed to be rowing back from their original position. Legislation has been passed, and the position at the moment is the government are going to consult on how to unpick what they've done. So it's still currently law, but it is likely to be repealed at some stage. That leaves us in a little bit of a tricky state, because some staff had previously been told before Christmas that if they don't get vaccinated, they may be redeployed or dismissed, which is quite a draconian measure. I'm going to be talking with Matt and the other directors. As far as possible, while this is law, we should be looking to redeploy people or put people on restricted duties. We shouldn't be sacking people if they choose not to be vaccinated. So we'll have to come up with some sort of interim measures to make sure that we don't start sacking people. I just fear that if we do that and the government repeals the legislation, we might end up with a raft of, unfair dismissal claims, even though it was law at the time. So, we're already having difficulties recruiting care staff. So I think we just need to tread carefully on this one. So
when do you expect that we might get some clarification?
I think there's a 12-week consultation period. So, hopefully before the end of the year. But we are required to have a policy by law as the law stands. So you can approve the policy and, once the law is repealed, we can remove the policy. But it's just a little bit of it's in a bit up in the air at the moment, what's happening. So mandatory vaccination.
Before you ask that question, Madeline pointed out to me that I should have taken a vote on noting the gender pay gap and the apprenticeship annual statement. And I would like to concur with Pauline. These are brilliant reports. Well done. Thank you very much, Chris. Those in favour, or noting, I should say. Yeah. Stephen, your question on vaccination policy.
It's not a question, John. It's a comment that, given the difficult circumstances Christine's just described, I think this strikes the right balance for the moment. It's all we can do at the moment. It does very explicitly say dismissal is a last resort, and one I hope we wouldn't have to call on. There are all sorts of other things we could do in advance of that last resort. So I think the way this is laid out actually strikes the right balance. So I'm supportive of it as a holding position until the government gets its act together and we actually sort this out.
I agree with Stephen. I think that the dismissal should be the last. But my concern in all this is that we don't end up doubling up with staff, and we end up with 6 months while this consultation goes on with double the amount of staff in those care areas. And I fail to see, as the areas are under such stress, how you can take a big chunk of that staff out of that and not replace them. And so I'm just a little bit concerned that we don't end up with runaway agency costs where we're employing agency staff who have been vaccinated and do comply with the existing law. This isn't unusual. I've come across this in the pension board, whereby we had to, a change in the law occurred and we had to implement it. But I'm just concerned about the costs. I mean, if we're moving people out of what is frontline roles and putting them into back office roles, or giving them roles that they may or may not be able to do, that we end up in a situation that we end up with twice as many staff, or at least, if not that, but big agency costs.
Do we know, Christine, what sort of population we're talking about?
Yeah, we're actually talking about between 6 and 10 people that are affected, that are refusing to be vaccinated. So it's not a huge number.
Basically, we have to approve this COVID vaccination policy because it's the law. Yes. And we're agreeing, pardon me? Pauline?
I may have got confused over this, but I thought the government had changed that legislation.
No, I checked.
Care homes.
I checked the website, the government website today, and it's out for consultation about how to repeal. They are going to repeal it. They have made a U-turn, but there are stages that they need to go through in order to get to that stage. But while they're doing that, this is still law.
So is it just a question of setting the process in motion rather than seeing it through before the government makes a decision? But it would terrify people to have the process begun, but hopefully it might not come right through to the end.
We already started last year to discuss with staff that they needed to be vaccinated. We were giving people, encouraging people to get vaccinated. Most staff have. I've been told that it's between 6 and 10 people have not or are refusing to be vaccinated, and we are discussing on a one-to-one basis what will happen with those people. Hopefully we can redeploy them from frontline duties to other duties within the care, the caring bits of the organisation, the social care. But, you know, we're a big council. We could temporarily redeploy them to other duties while this is all being sorted out. We're not talking huge numbers, you know, up to 10 people. We can absorb that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so given the rider that Christine's just given, is everybody happy with this policy? Thank you, carried. Yeah. So exclusion of the public, that under section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraphs 1 and 2 of Part 1 of the Schedule 12A of the Act as amended as appropriate.